Welcome. I am Kristina Campbell, your host for Sexual Freedom for Women, where you can learn how to lose your inhibitions, deeply connect, and finally experience the pleasure you have always desired. Today, I am interviewing Sarah Jane Farrell, PhD. This woman is amazing. I did have to shrink her bio down, like many of these interviews, and I'm going to read you a little snippet right now. Sarah Jane is a love warrior who helps people to trust and love themselves again, to reclaim the confidence they own, to own their worth, and know that they are enough no matter what anyone else says, including their own saboteur voices. Her medicine is part ancient intuitive wisdom, part psychotherapy. Her clients regularly report that her gentleness, humor, depth of awareness, and ability to create change as if by magic contribute to the massive results achieved in short periods of time. Today, Sarah Jane's going to be specifically talking with us about how to trust that you are enough. Sarah Jane, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's such a thrill to be with you, Kristina. I know we have a lot of resonance on this topic, and I'm just so grateful for you for holding this beautiful container for women to come together and tap back into their sexualness. So thank you.
Oh, so to get started, why don't you just tell our audience, what you do, how you work, and how you got into this line of work?
That's a big question, and I'll try and keep it short. As a verbal processor, that's not always easier. But yeah, how did I get into this work? I think by default or by absolute universal destiny and purpose. I think we're given what we need to learn, and also what we come here to share with others. And I think I did all my PhD of shame and depression and anxiety and not being enough, and squishing down my sexualness and my omnisexual beingness in the world, out there in the field of life, really just taking life's hard knocks and stumbling and getting up again and looking at what else was possible. And yeah, it's been a long journey, and I'm still learning and still growing. So I'm a work in progress as far as evolving into my full beingness.
Aren't we all? And that is the process of life, is accepting exactly where you are at and loving yourself through it and keeping going.
Exactly. And I think, animals, especially horses, have been a big part of my life. I grew up in Zimbabwe in the middle of a bush war, but I was very lucky to be in a country where I had the freedom to run and play, and had tortoises and horses and dogs and cats and wild animals right on my doorstep. And for me, that was really my safe place, because animals show you how to be present. They show you how to be in your fully embodied, in your sexualness, in your sensuality, to connect with other things. And I always prefer the company of animals to people, because there just was no judgment there, and I was very blessed in a lot of ways. But I think, I think when we're not aligned and we're not in our, congruent to our purpose, in our bodies, omnipresent, omnisexual, life and our bodies tell us no. Eventually they tell us no. And that for me was like the turning point of how I was creating business and how I was creating my life. 17 years ago was a big, literally I nearly died. I tried to kill myself. I was in a narcissistic relationship, and I basically lost everything I'd built as far as security and assets and properties and things. So that was a big wake up, for me to go, wow, okay, here's the turning point. You can choose to live, or you can choose to check out. So it's been an interesting journey, to say the least.
Right? Isn't life, right?
Yeah.
And choose to live. And what does trust have to do with living into our soul's calling? What does trust have to do with that when you choose to fully live?
Oh gosh, I think without trust, we don't have anything. I think it's one of the most important anchors. And I think where so many people are carrying around baggage and false beliefs about how they're creating, sexual energy, that sexual chakra energy. It's all about, how do I want to create my life? Whether we're birthing children or books or deeper right relationship with other people, if that element of trust isn't there, we're always coming from a place of heart wars and resistance, and we're not living full out. So I created the trust process as a place of bringing people back to the heart of what really matters to them. It's just like, what does it mean for you to be fully embodied is a great question. I think, and touching on sex, because that's what you're talking, your whole summit is about. We're not really talking about sex as in copulation, but we're talking about being sexual beings, being in a place where do I go as an action, rather than as something outside of ourselves. Instead of asking, how do I turn myself on, I work with people that have turned themselves off, who have left their bodies, who don't trust that they're enough, that their bodies are enough.
Right.
As women.
Right. Because that's what culture tells us. So when we're in a place of fear and not trusting our bodies and not trusting our sexuality and hearing those messages constantly, maybe we've had, deep trauma or just a baseline cultural trauma around our sexuality. How can someone who is in that really stuck place learn, start a process of beginning to trust themselves and trust that it's safe to connect with their sexuality?
You're asking such beautiful questions, because they're questions that I've asked myself time and time again, and I think that's the whole thing. When you kind of look at Maslow's theory, when you've had trauma, or you are the byproduct of intergenerational trauma or familial trauma or cultural trauma, and we've all been traumatized in one way or another, whether we know it or not, you can't be safe enough to start going into that next level of being fully alive. And I think Joseph Campbell says it so beautifully, that he says, I don't believe that people are looking so much for the meaning of life as much as they're looking for the experience of being alive. And in my own experience, for me, it's everything, again, that I've learned from animals, is that it's not so much about making sense of that or trying to head trip into what does trust look like, or it's a felt sense of how do I be present? How do I be present with what is in this moment right now, as a magnetic attraction that we're having in this conversation? There's a resonance there that feels open and kind and nurturing and loving, and our bodies will always go to what feels kind. And that's why I always say to my clients, is like, where is the place that you go when you disconnect from your body, in order to watch your body have the abuse? Because let's face it, a lot of sex is not kind, as in copulation, and a lot of sensualness is not kind either. And as women, we were talking about this before we got on the line. We've all experienced some level of that kind of trauma, of looking for the perfect man or the perfect relationship or the perfect job to fulfill us. Whereas in the old days, it took a village of different components of love and kindness and honoring and compassion and generosity to teach us how to grow into being fully present in our sexuality. And nowadays, societal constructs of sort of saying, oh no, you've got to choose one person, and that person has to fill you up, rather than saying, how can I fill myself up from a place of being attractive to my own self being, that isn't needy, that doesn't depend on anything outside of myself, because I'm self-sustaining. And that's where the confidence comes, when you can stay there and go, you know what, I don't need anything else other than for you to be here with me in this moment. Be here with me now. There's no caretaking there. When you're with me, be with me. And when you're not, have a beautiful life. It's none of my business. And I see that go so wrong in so many relationships. because we think we need to control every aspect of relationship that becomes needy. And of course, that's a sexual turnoff right there.
And what's so interesting is that, you know, our sex education doesn't teach us anything about a self-sexual connection. It teaches only about sex with another. And so, you know, and we experience our sexuality by how we are perceived by that other. And so how can we, with really what we've been taught, how can we go into that space and not bring neediness, you know? And it's like, you know, if we don't search and dig for another way to think about and another way to be in the sexual experience with ourselves and then with our partners. And I love that you brought up that quote by Joseph Campbell, because it really is, you know, it's not so much about the meaning of sex and what we're looking for. It's about actually being in the experience of it, learning how to be present. So interesting how that relates to life and sex.
Isn't it? I mean, I get the goosebumps because I think that, you know, the value of knowing or actually acknowledging, and this is, you know, getting back in probably a roundabout way because I feel things, that how do you get back in touch with yourself? And like you said, it's an inside job. If I can't be loving and kind, I would say, what would love do in this situation? Because love is always kind. It's never judgmental. It's never abusive. And yet we're so abusive to ourselves and to our bodies. And when we get clear about the relevance of what we perceive is living and about the way other people function, then you can have a different conversation about sex. And I think most women don't allow themselves to own their own desire of what I want. Pleasure, I want connection. You know, besides dolphins, we're the only other species on the planet that have sex as in copulation for the joy of feeling alive, for the joy of that connection and the pleasure, the self-pleasure. And through generations, since, you know, farming days, women were taught to suppress that because the only way that they could create safety was to be turned off by sex. Because their men didn't want them to be attracted to other men or women.
Kitty is right here.
Oh, so cute.
Pushing on this. So interesting that she hasn't come into any of the other interviews except with you.
She's gorgeous. Yeah, and you know, that's such a lovely segue that she did show up, because that's the thing, is just like a lot of people, when I start speaking about the elements of sex from a different perspective, of saying, go out, go for a walk and just look around and look at what turns you on. And it's that cat that, you know, kind of just comes and brushes past your cheek. It's very sexual. Because they give without there being any condition on giving. They do it for their own pleasure, especially cats.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, we know we're all slaves to our cats. But, you know, there's no demand on it. And so many people are uncomfortable when they kind of go out and do that exercise, and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, when I asked my body what loving sexual energy felt like for me, my eyes were drawn to a child playing in the sand. Does that make me a pedophile? You know, my eyes are drawn to an wrinkly old man that's painting or smoking or playing, you know, boule in the field. What does that make me? We're always looking for the meaning making of it, rather than actually looking to our body as this beautiful consciousness facilitator that's saying that is the energy that fills you up, because you're allowing yourself to go there. So many people, and I was one of them, that just shut it down because it was too scary to feel totally, you know, feel everything. And I always say, you can't heal if you don't feel. And that's that wholeness, isn't it? Of coming back to that I am multisensory, and I am omnisexual. I'm a sensual being that wants to create.
And what do you mean by omnisexual for our audience?
Oh, wow. That I'm everything and nothing. I'm connected to everything. So if I'm, if I'm the, I'll give you the analogy that comes to mind is watching a spider weave a web, and the perfection of the sacred geometry of it. That every strand is exactly how it needs to be. And when its little fly gets trapped in the web, and it shakes like this, the web connects the weaver, the predator and the prey aspect of it, to be in total giving and receiving of that contract, that this is it. I'm your dinner tonight, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just a really simple analogy of how we deny the predator aspect of ourselves, or the wild woman aspect of ourselves, because it feels so frightening. And then we go into denying and resisting and starving ourselves of touch, because we need the sensuality is being touched, it's being caressed, it's being held. That's what bodies love, physical bodies love, and the sex part also amazes me, because sex is not copulation. So when you're talking about, sexual freedom, that's about allowing yourself, giving yourself permission. And this is my insight into it. What I've learned is that it's when I'm feeling good about myself. It's when I can hold my head up tall and I can strut my stuff. And it's when people flow energy at you about how much they're admiring your body. That's another little play thing I get my clients to do, is I say, go to a public place and I want you to really strut your stuff. Like really exaggerate, swinging your hips, and see how many people, men, women, and children, turn around to appreciate you, because we've shut off receiving that energy from everyone. So that's what I mean by omnisexualness, is that sex is about being willing to receive how people admire you, because they see a part in them, in you, that they've shut down and denied access to. So, and it's so fun to do that, because we're not used to receiving, especially as women. It's not copulation, right? Copulation is when you're putting body parts together, and it doesn't matter what parts you're putting together. It's not sexualness. It's not sensuality. That's omnisexualness, omnipresence, sexuality, sex, copulation. Enjoy putting your body parts together, and not come from a place where you're in service, which so many women think, because old days that meant security. Right? We're independent women now, and yet we're still living on these outdated neural pathways that say, oh my goodness, I better be a good girl, I better be the submissive partner, I need to give before I can ask for what I desire. And that sexuality part is always that contraction of sexualness and awareness into judgment. And that might have wound your head around. So do you want me to say that again?
I do.
Yeah. So it creates a limitation of possibilities. When you deny your sexuality, it's a refusal to ask for what you desire. So there's this contraction of your sexualness and what you are aware of what your body desires. And then you have to turn it into a judgment in order for you to turn yourself off.
Yes.
Isn't that insane?
Yes.
It's crazy.
That is so insightful. And I totally connect to where I was at when my sexuality was really shut down.
Me too. Because it's always a diminishment of what you're willing to receive. So it actually has nothing to do with what the other person is doing or not doing. Right? Because you're in the place of lack. So when you do sexuality, you can't have that beautiful energy exchange that is truly you. because you're saying that would mean that I'm not me. I think I tend to screw around with people's heads, and I'm screwing with my own now, because I was like, what? So it's like, kind of like, if I could say, if I said, and I had a client once, and he had the most beautiful sort of top end imported men's shirts. They were gorgeous. And he was moaning because his business wasn't doing well. And it actually came back down to the fact that he had an issue that was given to him, because remember, an issue is never yours. It's an assigned, someone gives it to you, that he couldn't be receiving of man on man relationships. So it's like, if I said I can't ever have sex with a woman, and you're a woman, then can you really have sex with yourself? So with him, he was saying, I can't be receiving of the money that these beautiful gay men would bring into my shop because they loved his clothing, because he had a judgment that he couldn't have sex with himself. And I'm talking about copulation now. He couldn't have true receiving of himself as his own self-perpetuation of sensuality and sexuality. So active and passive reproduction. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
Yeah, it's just interesting where this is going. That, you have to always, when you're cutting off sexuality, what you're really saying is that you can't receive yourself.
Wow.
So it always creates a limitation in what you're capable of out creating. So you can never be better than you were the day before, because you're saying, oh my God, yesterday, or what I hear a lot, and I used to say to myself, oh my God, best sex I ever had was back in when I was 16. I've never had that again. So even in acknowledging and speaking that, we're actually saying to the universe, don't give me anything better than what I defined as the best sex I ever had. It's crazy.
Our own limitation.
Yeah.
So I really loved what you talked about, and I want to touch again on that whatever issues you have are given to you. I feel like in that container of understanding, if our audience could deeper understand what you're saying right there, that it might be a pathway for some people to be able to start to let go of certain issues if they really deeply understand that they're truly not theirs. Here you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of the places where we as women, as supposedly modern women, we're still living with this entanglement of old assigns and belief systems and lies about what it means to be fully sexual, based on our mother's mother, mm-hmm. and our paternal side as well. So there in itself is trauma. So how do we unhook from that? Well, we've got to start looking at how can I be in a place where I'm better than I was yesterday. It's always, for me, it's always out creation. It's always out creation, because our mothers did the best they could with what they had. I know growing up in my house, it wasn't talked about. My mother and father didn't have to say their marriage was crap. You felt it in the house. There was no love there. And there was a lot of verbal abuse in it too. So that's really confusing as a child who's really embodied. Children are so sexual, and yet we make them wrong for being in their bodies and finding pleasure in, tickling their sides or, playing with their genitals. It's taboo. So we grow up with this thing of be in your body, stay in your body. And yet we're telling our children that there's shame in being in touch with their own bodies.
So how do we start to unhook from that lineage
Mhm.
from that lineage of trauma, familial trauma. What's a practice or a way of thinking that can help us to unhook from those issues and really realize that they have nothing to do with us?
Wow. You know, again, there's so many ways that you could go into that, but for me, it's about getting curious about what turns you on.
Mm-hmm.
Being willing to receive the no when you ask for what you want,
Mm-hmm.
and really feeling into where you feel that in your body, the abandonment, the fear of rejection, or the feeling of excitation, or, you know, eroticism that often comes from that. You know, now we're into sort of the other stuff, because some people actually find that to be a turn on. So I think it's, for me, it's really about getting the energy of the creation of how do I want to live my life embodied and be in my body. You know, what if my life could be an orgasmic experience? Because it's going to look different for each one of us. And I think it's in the baby steps, it's in the 1 degree shifts, because it's scary. You know, if you've been disconnected, if you've been kind of walking around like a horse, the horse is your body and the head is the rider. We live here most of the time. We're totally cut off from feeling our bodies. And I don't think any woman masturbate enough either, as a way of getting back into their bodies, of connecting with their sensuality, of giving themselves pleasure. And most of the time it's because they're too tired, or, you know, there's too much going on. We're exhausted when we fall into bed. And yet we're depriving ourselves of the one thing that only we can give ourselves, which is to get back into touch with what fills me up. How can I feel alive again? Well, start with touching your body.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it's also that, like, you know, women don't think about self-pleasure or masturbation because culturally it's not part of how our sexuality as women is acceptable to grow. It is totally acceptable for young boys to explore their bodies and need privacy and take long showers, but nobody ever talks about that, about a young woman exploring her own body and her own sexuality, because all we're ever taught is to push it down, because either you can get an STD or you can get pregnant. It's not at all about pleasure. It's not all about exploration. And so oftentimes women haven't even explored their bodies, so they don't even know what they want or like, and they're just expecting their partner to know. And I was absolutely stuck in that place before starting a practice of self-pleasure. And I totally connect with what you said. You know, it was real, you know, I've been in a marriage for 13 years and I've gone through a place of the beginning where you're exploring everything, and then the death of sex. It was just,
the honeymoon phase is over. Children,
was
breastfeeding.
Yes. And everything was his fault, which I totally connected to what you said about taking your issue and shutting yourself down and then creating judgment in order to shut down. So my judgment was on him, and having to actually take personal responsibility for my own desires, my own deep longing, and allow to keep looking inward, to keep looking inward. And then the other part is really communicating, learning how to ask for what you need, because women are just serving all the time. And so and I loved what you said, that it's in the 1 degree shifts, you know, that we don't really have to look at what's over there. You know, we can just go.
Today is a new day. You know, the adventure of oh, sorry. That was silly. The real life, eh? This is life. Kitties and kids screaming and dogs barking and phones ringing, and that's it. You know, as women, we're multifaceted, and we are so resilient in everything except our own self-care. You know, and that's what we need to get. Well, I think, you know, that's what I'm working on, is be purposeful. Because if you're avoiding, you're compromising you, and then the people in your life don't get to see the best of you. You know, it's the greatest gift, and it's the biggest misabuse, is this disconnection from saying, you know what? I feel really good today. Life is good.
Finding gratitude.
Yeah.
So how do women begin to shift? Like, what is a practice or tool that can create that, you know, beginning to do a 1-degree shift of prioritizing ourselves with intention?
You ask the deepest, most beautiful questions, and it's just like, I know we only have 30 minutes.
No, we only have a
you know,
couple more minutes.
you know, I think it's important again to go back to the beginning of saying, where do I want to go? Where is the place that I want to go when I'm so fully in my body and I'm strutting my stuff? And when you find yourself going away, coming back and saying, hey, am I present here? Or have I gone away? Because if I'm not willing to have that conversation, and this is what the animals have shown me, is just like, this is not about domination over. This isn't about compromising my needs for yours. This is not about someone has to win and someone has to lose. This is about meeting me. And I'm talking about, first of all, your body. And I get the goosebumps. It's like, meet yourself, your body, in a place of, are you with me? Do we have a conversation? Before you start wanting to have a conversation with your partner or your children or your animals, you have to look at, am I committed to meet you here? And leave the past in the past, and stop looking into the future of what you think could be better, or, you know, the grass is only greener when you water it. So water your own internal garden, you know, tend to your garden.
Oh,
Get
I
those
love
juices
that.
flowing.
The grass is only greener when you water it. That's so
Yeah.
great. I just made a link between what you said and something you said earlier, which was, you know, leave the past in the past. And my mind, you know, immediately went to, sometimes that's hard for people when they've had resentment and stuff. And then earlier you said something to the effect of, I always say, what would love say?
What would love do?
What would love do? And so I love that when you're trying to leave the past in the past so that you can be truly present and show up for yourself, and you're feeling that resistance, the question is, what would love do?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And even more, what would love do in the place that your body wants to go? You know, so to me, it's a simple shift. There's no magic pill. We all have our stories. We all have our old experiences. We all have measures. We're taught and programmed to always measure and problem solve. But why would we want to create a problem that doesn't exist in order to get acknowledged or validated as enough before we're willing to strut our stuff? Which is the sexual freedom that your whole being is built on.
Yes.
You know, we're cute, not bright. Because it's so simple. It's just like, hey, you know, and I know, you know, there's so much pressure put on us to perform based on what we were talking about, you know, in generations of being that. You didn't ask for what you wanted. And still in a lot of places in Africa where I live, there, you know, genital mutilation is still continuing, so that women cannot feel to keep them loyal to their husbands. You know, it's something that the more we speak of, the more we can start changing it. Because you don't have to be physically mutilated in your sexual, you know, your sexual parts
to be numb.
We as Western women do a really good job of doing that all by ourselves, emotionally, mentally.
Because our culture does it too. Even if they don't take the knife to us, they are absolutely.
We're checking out. Yeah.
Because
you know,
that's
no difference.
That's what we're told to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Disembody. Yeah.
You are prolific. You've got so much knowledge. I love your perspective. You just go
Thank
straight in
you.
and make these little shifts. I so resonate. It's beautiful.
Good.
So I'd love for you to tell our audience about your free gift that you are offering today.
And I would love to invite you into that with excitement and total sexual beingness to for your listeners, if they're resonating with this, or they want to get back in touch and get out of starving themselves of this beautiful interconnectedness, to reach out and book a 30-minute clarity discovery call with me, where we can really go deep and look at what are some of the limitations that you're putting in place that are stopping you from actually living full out, and being present in the moment, and making yourself come alive again, really stoke those fires and get that sexual energy up and into your heart and out into the world. So that's what I'm offering, is an opportunity to just deepen into this conversation on a
Wow,
much
Sarah,
personal level.
that is really a generous offer to talk with you about what's personally going on in women's lives. So I want to invite our audience to take Sarah Jane up on that opportunity to have a one-on-one phone call with her, where you can work through some finding the specific shifts that you might need in your life to make the change that you're desiring, and to finally be able to let go, deeply connect, and experience the pleasure that you are waiting for or wanting. Sarah Jane, thank you so much for being here and for offering such a generous gift to our audience.
It's been an absolute joy and pleasure. You filled me up. This conversation filled me up, and I know the women that you're touching are going to be filled up with the opportunity and the possibilities that are available. So thank you, Kristina.
Oh, only
For
possible
you.
because of beautiful women like you doing amazing work. So thank you as well. Deep gratitude for your presence here with us today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
until we meet again. Bye, everybody.